This is going to be a really, really interesting one because, I mean, when we talk about technology and we talk about this year, this really has to be the key to what has made us survive this year. Obviously, without the medical innovation, I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about continuing to work, continue to jump into the future. COVID-19 has made us do things we've only been speaking about. Well, the reality is now we're not speaking about them anymore. We're doing them. I mean, if you look at how many people we have managed to gather from different parts of the world, it's incredible. We're all here together on one link, sharing these ideas. These are being recorded and these are being spoken to all over the world. And I must say, it's been so exciting to see the development and the way things have changed moving forward. We have put together for you such an unbelievable panel with a wealth of knowledge that is going to share with us some of their expertise and experiences when it comes to technology and when it comes to how COVID-19 has made us reimagine the way things are done. It's fundamentally changed the way we do business. There's no two ways about it. We have had to change. We've had to adapt. We have had to become people that we read about almost in science fiction movies or in the future. We are the future now, and we have to pick up the momentum and carry on doing what we're doing. I mean, the role of agriculture, education, healthcare, e-commerce, ICT have been amazing in this entire time that we've been going through. We've seen an adoption of homegrown innovations because suddenly the outside world was foreign to us, and we all had to worry about ourselves and doing what it is that we can to enhance our economies, which has been just absolutely incredible. But I'm not going to say much more. My job here is to just introduce who we've got and, of course, then hand you over to our facilitator or moderator for today. We've got Kathy Smith, who is from SAP Africa, the Managing Director. Vanessa Adams, VP Strategic Partnerships and Chief of Party Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. Stephen Pope, he's the VP, Head of Go Trade, Deutsche Post DHL. Jonathan Smith, the founder and Manager Director of PayFast. Katya Blouin, who is the Chief Business Officer of APO Group. And Anino Emua, who is the founder and Managing Director of Avandis Consulting. So at this point, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to the moderator for the session, Justin Norman, who is the founder and host of The Flip Africa. Justin, the stage is yours.
Thanks so much. And thank you to the conference organizers, AWIEF, for having us, and for all of you attendees listening, and for the panelists for joining us. My name is Justin Norman. I host a podcast called The Flip. We speak to some of the most esteemed and innovative entrepreneurs and startups from around the continent, trying to get really in-depth insights from the technology sector in particular. And if I may just sort of give myself a shameless plug for a minute, we're actually releasing an episode tomorrow on the Stripe acquisition of Paystack, so you guys can check us out, theflip.africa, or on our website or on social media at theflipafrica. But that's all I'm going to say about me. I'd like to just go around the horn, and I know all of you have been introduced, but maybe just to introduce yourselves a little bit further and say a little bit more about what you do, what work you do, and a bit about your respective organizations and how it relates to this topic about the bridging role of technology. So maybe let's go in ABC order to do it easiest. So Anino, I think you're up first. Would you mind just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit more about what you do?
Well, first of all, thank you, AWIEF, for having all of us here, and hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Anino Emua. I'm the founder and managing director of Avandis Consulting, which is a strategy and financial advisory firm in France. We work also in Africa. In fact, we work globally. Our work covers a lot to do with entrepreneurship, innovation, technology. We speak on conferences, and we also have communities of women in leadership. We also have communities of women in fintech and in payments in Europe and also in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Cathy, I think you're up next.
Perfect. Thank you, Justin, and greetings to everybody who's on the call today, and thanks for having me. I'm Kathy Smith, and I'm the Managing Director for SAP Africa. SAP is a giant in the software industry, but actually we founded our roots less than 50 years ago. So I always say that we kind of the teenager of the ICT industry, with many other organizations being much older. They're the grandparents, I would say. And we founded our roots on entrepreneurship. So 5 young engineers finding a gap in the marketplace, working in their garage, coming up with a solution, and lo and behold, through perseverance and lots of hard work, we've grown into being a giant organization. But in spite of that success that we've had, always at the core of our organization is our purpose, which is to help the world run better and improve people's lives. And this discussion around women in Africa in particularly, and talking about entrepreneurship and innovation is hot in our organization in terms of how we can contribute. Thank you, Justin.
Definitely. If SAP is a teenager, I'm not sure how old that makes PayFast, but we'll turn it over to Jonathan next time.
I think they're a little bit of a toddler, Justin. Yeah.
Jonathan, what do you think? Do you mind introducing yourself?
No worries. Thanks very much, Justin. So as I was introduced, Jonathan Smith, the founder and managing director of PayFast. PayFast is a payment service provider, so a fintech firm operating in payments, homegrown in South Africa, started by me 13 odd years ago. So I've had a fairly, I suppose a fairly long journey in entrepreneurship. But one of the things that we've always kind of tried to engender in PayFast as a culture is supporting small businesses, supporting entrepreneurs, and helping them grow and succeed online. Which, to Leanne's point earlier, it's been a fairly well-growing industry year on year, but on a very, very small base. It's just been accelerating, and this year has been a shot in the arm in terms of people shifting to digital. But e-commerce and digital payments still makes up a tiny portion of the market, even with that growth. So really interesting to see what the future holds and where we go with this. And I'm interested in this discussion today on some of those topics.
Thank you. Katya, I think you're up next in alphabetical order.
Yes, absolutely. Hello, my name is Katya Blouin, and I'm the Chief Business Officer with APO Group. APO Group is a Pan-African communications consultancy and a press release distribution service. And essentially what we do is we help organizations and brands shape their stories and communicate them across the continent. So we've been doing that for about 13 years as well. And being part of the AWIEF is extremely important for us. There are a number of initiatives that we support. We support women in business. APO Group is about 70% women, which is fantastic. We equally support sports. We support entrepreneurs across the continent. So I look forward to sharing some insights with you and hearing yours as well.
Thank you, Katya. I think, Stephen, you're up next, please.
Thank you, Justin. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to this important forum. I'm delighted that I can join this panel, such an esteemed panel. My name is Stephen Pope. I'm the Group Head of Trade Facilitation at the Deutsche Post DHL Group. It's known as Go Trade. Deutsche Post DHL is the world's largest logistics company and the world's most international company. So for this forum, we're in every single country in Africa. So what exactly are we doing? What we're doing is we launched it this year, Go Trade, and it's a trade facilitation department. We're working with donors and international organizations basically to support sustainable economic growth through trade. Our group purpose is connecting people and improving lives. And we focus on 2 key areas using technology. That is streamlining, modernizing border processes, customs, for example. And the other one is helping SMEs and MSMEs to access global markets via e-commerce. So we train them right across the piece from marketing, sales, how to use the internet, how to sell online, but also in terms of compliance as well, what sort of customs processes they need as well. So it's 2 areas, customs facilitation and training SMEs to use technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And last but certainly not least, Vanessa. Next time we'll do reverse alphabetical order, so you don't have to wait as long. But Vanessa,
okay, last name's so I can win either way. So I'm Vanessa Adams. I'm the Vice President for Strategic Partnerships at the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. And AGRA is an African-based nonprofit organization targeting particular growth in agriculture from smallholder farmers through markets, SMEs, to supporting governments implementing their national ag investment strategies. and their plans. And we work, as you probably well know, with many partners, including some of you and many of those who are listening and participating today, towards improving livelihoods. And we think that digitization in the time of COVID is absolutely critical. And every statistic, every survey, every analysis we have done have shown that women entrepreneurs are struggling even more than they usually are right now. They're cash strapped, their markets are volatile. I think that the Go Trade initiative you just mentioned, Stephen, is fantastic for this kind of environment because nobody knows where and when the rules are changing constantly. And so what was already an unequal trade environment with a lack of transparency has become much more volatile during COVID, which is to be expected. And I think everybody's optimistic that COVID environment will result in a huge bounce back upon resumption of activity. And yet the economists are forecasting terrible recessions, downturns in so many areas, and struggles over budget allocations, as you all know very well. What was a 10% commitment towards agriculture in many countries in Africa is going towards health, which is very obvious. So I think from an AGRA perspective, and thanks to Irene and the fantastic work that AWIEF has done over the years, convening such high-level engagement, participation, we really are excited to talk about the role of digital to bridge the gap, really from farm to fork, and particularly in light of the upcoming Food Systems Summit in 2021. And so there's a real potential to rethink, rebuild, and not just build back the same old out of COVID. So I think that's a huge introduction, but thanks. Over to you, Justin.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. And yeah, we'll get into all of it. And before I ask the first question, I see some questions for Q&A at the end coming in. So please don't hesitate if you're an attendee to ask some questions in the app, and they'll make it over to us. But where I'd like to start, I think, is obviously we're hopefully pretty soon, knock on wood, coming out of a pretty significant global pandemic. If there's one sort of positive second order effect, obviously it's that it's compelled organizations, big and small, to transform digitally in ways that we didn't think would happen as rapidly as they have. So I'd like to start there and talk a little bit about, the stickiness of this transformation, and then, go deeper from there. So maybe to start, I'd like to start with you, Cathy. From SAP's perspective, obviously you have a pretty good view from a business perspective at a large cross sector of companies, and how, from a technology perspective, these companies are transforming digitally. So could you speak to what you're seeing, or some of the changes that you're seeing on the continent in the past 6 to 9 months or so?
Yeah, undoubtedly. Significant changes, I would say, Justin, and changes that I think are going to absolutely result in us not going back to the old world in any shape, size, or form. But so technology has, in many ways, whilst it has exacerbated and made very obvious the differences between those who have and those who haven't. And I think Vanessa talked very beautifully around exacerbating problems that were there in the past. I've been the eternal optimist that we are, and looking at what the opportunities like on the continent, we also see opportunities for this disruption and using technology to really accelerate many more, particularly women, into the entrepreneurial space. Because new industries are starting to have a lot more muscle, I think, that we had seen before. And what's really, really becoming evident to us is, as each organization in different industries in Africa are facing their own set of challenges with COVID, the role of technology as the enabler to solve some of their challenges has never been more important, or more opportune, I should say, at this time. But what overrides all of this, I would say, is not so much the technology. I mean, technology, we can have a discussion around that, the availability, the cost, what solution fits in where. The overriding issue is the mindset. The mindset to say, will we embrace technology to help our organizations to do better and to cope with the changes that have been forced on us? And secondly, will we use and commit to using technology to create a more inclusive economy? And that for me has been the fundamental change. So many of my conversations with customers are a lot more around what do we need to do more than just keeping our businesses afloat, but to truly contribute to economic growth and doing that through inclusion. And for me, the opportunity for women entrepreneurs has never been better if we can overcome some of the challenges like access as one example.
Yeah, and we're going to get into all of that, but if we can just still lay the foundation, Jonathan, I'm going to ask you, obviously from a digitization perspective, payments are for many businesses very central to that. And, you know, even just in 2020, in the midst of pandemics, you know, one payments company just got acquired, PayFast parent company got acquired, right? So there's a huge appetite for what's happening. I'd love to get your perspective, especially as it relates to payments. And then maybe Stephen, I'll ask you as it relates to e-commerce about what sort of trends we're seeing, how things are evolving, and how this fits into the whole sort of post-COVID narrative about how things are going to change for the continent.
Look, absolutely. I mean, from a payments perspective, we've been it's been a very busy year for PR and marketing because you know, we've had such a rapid change in things, and we've been putting out a lot of data on this. You know, I mean, e-commerce in South Africa and Africa and digital payments, so you can put those two together. Let's not say e-commerce only. Is still very early stage stuff, right? It's, you know, a developed market, your percentage of retail that occurs online is between about 10 and 20%, and that's even accelerated now. But in South Africa, at least, it was about 1 to 2%, right? So really, really small. But that number doubled in a matter of days, right? So we saw, you know, if our stats are representative, we saw 100% growth in 30 days, which is, you know, phenomenal, right? As everyone was sitting at home on their smartphones, on their computers, they resorted to doing things that they would normally have done in the real world, doing online rather. So, you know, I think we kind of, a lot of people got used to in the last number of years shopping for maybe a TV or a computer or something online, but more normal things started being bought online as well, like your groceries, you know, and your daily essentials. So whether it be medication or hand sanitizer or whatever it happened to be, right? So it really was this massive shift across. I mean, it still means that number is still sitting only in South Africa, at least, at between 2 and 4% of retail occurring online. So it's still got a mile to go before we reach anywhere near what a developed market is like. And that's South Africa, which has a reasonably developed, you know, technology infrastructure and delivery framework and all the rest of it. So it's not the rest of Africa where these things are still lagging a little bit, right? So I think it's just definitely just woken up the whole world, actually, which is the interesting thing, is that this same trend was seen internationally. So the US penetration there jumped from 16% to 27% within 8 weeks. And that's a developed market. I mean, massive, huge developed market, which saw the same trends that we're seeing here. So I think it's just really kind of, you know, woken up the world to digital to some degree, and it's accelerated digital adoption by probably 3 to 5 years is the general consensus, you know, across the world really, but across South Africa, Africa, and the rest of the world, we've seen the same thing.
Yeah. And what's so remarkable in the context of this conversation, as well as, like, you just mentioned those numbers about the US, and 27% penetration is really not that high when you think about, I mean, how big of a company Amazon is in particular, right? And so there's a lot of room for growth, certainly on the continent, but then also in developed markets as well. So, you know, from payments, then obviously to delivery, to the delivery and logistics end of e-commerce. Stephen, I'd love to get your perspective, because obviously, you know, there's still part of this digitization element is still a physical logistics. I mean, we still live in an analog world, and so that's where you know, the role of a group like DHL plays to try to actually bring, you know, packages and deliveries to people who order them online. So what are you seeing? I mean, is it an uptick in volumes? Is it more people coming online, and as it relates to trying to facilitate trade through the Go Trade initiative as well, what's happening in that space?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. So, yeah, we're in an analog world, but actually our business is totally digital, global. And what we've seen is, we've estimated that with COVID, when you bear in mind our whole network is run online, we've actually moved about 4 years in technology during that period, in like a 6 to 9 month period. What we're seeing in terms of e-commerce is reflected by Jonathan, we're seeing a continual growth globally. Yeah, there's a huge impact, and as has been reported worldwide, a lot of carriers like ourselves have seen massive volumes that we wouldn't expect to see. And at Christmas this year, we're expecting to see record volumes again. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's been quite interesting. We've seen considerable growth in some countries. Some countries within Africa have actually picked this up really well, and we're seeing double-digit growth. And it's outbound, which is more important, because then that's trade where hard currency is coming into the countries. What we're also seeing is we've continued with our investments. We've continued with our development around apps and supporting various programs that we have. And one of the interesting things that we're seeing as well is we're seeing a queue of donors and international organizations looking to work with us on trade facilitation, particularly around focusing on e-commerce in Africa. I think one of the key elements of it, and maybe we'll touch on that in a minute, but one of the areas that really needs a strong focus is the digitalization of border processes, not just inbound, but in particular for sub-Saharan Africa, outbound. We want intra-African trade, but we want exports as well. And at the moment, we're busying ourselves with the discussion around the vaccine delivery, and of course those syringes and needles, etc. But one of the things that we're focusing on is that if countries implement the digitalized modernization programs now to facilitate the vaccine, once it's done, it's done. That infrastructure is then there for an economic recovery. So this is another area that is a key one for us.
Yeah, we're ready for these vaccines to get delivered. So here in South Africa. So I think that lays a pretty good foundation. I mean, maybe we can also talk from a sector specific perspective about then in your respective sectors, what else is happening. But in particular, I want to talk about as we're then building for the future on the foundation that's being laid now, or a more rapidly laying foundation as a result of COVID. What this means in the context of women in entrepreneurship. A few of you mentioned inclusivity as part of it, and making sure that what's being built now fits into, or makes up for, doesn't make mistakes for excluding anyone. So Katya, can I maybe turn it over to you first to speak to, from your perspective, and maybe with some of the clients that you guys work with as well, how you're going about doing that, or how you're thinking that the opportunities ought to be taken advantage of now that we're sort of transitioning out of COVID and a lot of the infrastructure is being built digitally.
Absolutely. I would like to take a look at media a little bit here. And Cathy, you've mentioned the fact that COVID-19 has propelled a lot of issues that have already been there. It showed to us that there is really something that needs to be done. And when it comes to media, the way that women's perspective has been lacking, not just in Africa, but across the world. We've seen a lack of female experts talking about the issue. We've seen a lack of impact on women and on women's businesses that COVID-19 has brought about. And this is something that is a huge deal, because in Africa today, we have over 50% of females being self-employed. Now, they are already facing a lot of issues in terms of access to capital, in terms of access to training, in terms of access to education, and a bunch of other problems. But besides that, we're also missing their perspective in terms of how they have been affected by what COVID-19 has brought about. And this is something that can be changed. And to be honest, the change is not that difficult. We need more women in newsrooms. We need more journalists. We need to see more female experts actually being interviewed. And as a communications agency, we support AWIEF with our Women in Media Award. But what we also do is we support journalists, students of journalism, in various schools of journalism across Africa, talking to them about what does this profession mean, and why is it actually great to be a journalist in Africa today, and how does a woman's perspective in media can make a difference? Because obviously the world that we live in, the businesses that we work in, they have different impacts on men or women. So that's one side of the story. And I think I am hoping that this is the positive effect that COVID has brought about. And this is a positive effect. That's something that we are going to learn from. This would be from one side of the story. Now, in terms of communication, as a company that helps brands communicate, what we've seen is that the way we communicate has fundamentally changed. If before we could go out to a trade show, we could meet each other during AWIEF physically, we can no longer do that. So we turn to different tools. We turn to digital, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that over the next 2 days. Digital has created so many opportunities for dialogue, for companies to actually hear what their customers have to say in real time, pretty much. We couldn't really do that before. So the importance of digital in the way we communicate is here to stay, and it's only going to grow stronger. Now, that being said, I do not believe that PR is going to go away. I do not believe that physical meetings will go away because, well, we miss seeing each other. We miss bad coffee. Maybe not. So I think that moving forward, it's going to be important to find that balance between seeing each other, between physical ways of communication as well as digital. And once again, take into consideration inclusivity. I hope that answers your question, Justin.
Yeah, definitely. We're gonna go around the horn a little bit. So, Anino, from your perspective in the work that you do, and you work with a lot of entrepreneurs and startups and folks in the fintech space in particular. I mean, the early stage technology space is also not necessarily the most inclusive environment. And when you look at, the pictures of who are the ones who are fundraising the most in the African tech industry, it's not a lot of women. So as it relates to then the sort of transformative opportunities that are born of COVID-19 in your space and in the work you're doing, what are your thoughts and what are you seeing and what do you hope happens in the near term?
Well, thank you for that. I will start just by continuing on from what Katya said, and she talked about needing to have more women visible. And in the last few months, the only way in which we've heard the voices of people has been digitally. And it's far from being anecdotal, but what we actually found were that we saw so many panels where we didn't have women on any panels. So it could be in academia, it could be in economics, it could be in technology, talking about changes and the changes that need to be had to make things move. So even as basic as that, we intervened on several panels going to the organizers to say, we need to have women there. So that's the first thing, just basically to have the voice of women out there. Now, what have we seen? Yes, you're very right. I mean, many of the interesting deals that have happened in the last few months, you talked about Spacetac, who has been bought for 200 million. Flutterwave raised 35 million into Switch before the crisis. Visa paid 200 million for a 20% share. Kuda has raised 10 million. All that has been in the payment space, incidentally, in Nigeria, actually. So a lot has been happening in terms of payments and e-commerce because of the digital transformation and because people, have to sort of make payments digitally now. And the acceleration in transformation over the last few months has been phenomenal. What we've seen is that what could have taken probably a year, happened in a matter of 2 months. So with all of that happening, the question therefore is, are we sure that women are being included in all of this? And that is the role that we have to play, and that's the role that we do play. In fact, I do lead the one of the networks for women in fintech and payments in Nigeria, and also I'm part of the European one, which is actually a global one. And what's important right now is that we find that all the ills of the banking sector have been created for hundreds of years. And that is really the sector at the time where it started, many, many hundreds of years ago, women didn't have access to bank accounts. We'd be surprised to actually hear that women were only allowed to open accounts without having, approval from husbands as late as the 1965 in Europe and America. So really, the banking sector has only started including women in the last 50 years or so. Now, what we're saying is that the fintech sector is new, right? It only really started to boom after the crisis in 2008 and 2009. And all the transformation that we're trying to make in the banking sector in terms of inclusive products, etc., and also inclusive in terms of leadership and in terms of women in the workspace, we don't want that to happen in fintech and then spend another 200 years again trying to change that. So it has to start now. And there are very many ways in which that has to be done. First of all, we look at the issues of women in STEM and what are the barriers on having women in STEM. The major one, obviously, in terms of fintech is all about innovation. It's in terms of about venture capital. We look at funding and what are the issues to do with funding in terms of women-led businesses. This is where the ecosystem is very much involved also with the with research. One of the most interesting pieces of research which came out, I think, in the last few months or in the last 1 year, was looking at how when women pitch for funding and what happens. And what it was found that when women pitch for funding, what happens is that the questions that the VCs ask them are very different, markedly different from questions that men are asked. That is to say, women are asked questions which are now classified as prevention questions. So how are you going to curtail risk? Have you looked at how this might affect your business, etc. And so the woman is put in a defensive position, whereas men were generally asked about things like, where do you see your business going? Where are the opportunities for growth? And so automatically, men typically were talking about growth and all the nice stories, whereas women were talking about how to prevent things happening. So, by the way, it's not just whether the VC was a man or woman. It is both men and women ask similar questions. So even as basic as that, fundamental as that, how women raise funds and how are they perceived as well are things that we're working on. What we've seen and has been really important in the last few months is women financing women. That has started in America. It's growing across into Africa as well. We have funds like Rising Tide, etc., who are female VCs who are looking at funding, women as well as, generally, but also looking at women. So there's a lot of interest in funding women. The research has also shown that actually that women-led fintechs actually have performed better. This was research which was done in the UK earlier in the year that actually performed better. So I think with all this awareness, what is happening is that we're seeing that there's a lot more interest in that. I personally ran, I think it was last year, I ran a training on unconscious bias for a group of venture capitalists who were interested in investing in women-led funds. So we're still at the beginning stages, but it's very important that we have the awareness. It's very important that funding is there. Networks are key and critical for women-led ventures because it allows them access to information, allows them access to knowledge, it allows them to, the visibility as well. So these are some of the things that, we see happening right now.
Yeah, and it's just interesting. I'll point out all of the fintechs that you mentioned earlier are all founded and led by men. So
absolutely,
yeah. One point that I want to go back to that you talked about was this question about there's conscious or unconscious bias when it comes to funding women. Yes. And I'm going to turn this question now over to you, Vanessa, and do a little bit of a inorganic segue. But in any case, we've experienced, obviously there's plenty of research to say that in like micro lending, for example, that it's more success. Lenders find more success lending to women than to men, and in particular, a lot of like women entrepreneurs and MSMEs and smallholder farmers and all of the rest kind of carry the continent on their back and support their families. And so, Vanessa, I'd like to hear from your perspective as it relates to that topic and as it relates to the work that you're doing in agriculture, and as it relates to the work that you're doing in agriculture and inclusivity. What's happening there, and similarly, what ought to continue or to more interventions that need to happen in this space for you as well.
That was like 6 questions in one. So
yes, I was getting them all out.
I love that. I tend to do the same thing. So let me start from the most micro perspective that you just asked about, which is farmers, women farmers, right, are borrowing tiny micro loans at egregious rates, like 45% APR, borrowing $100 or $200, and basically indebting themselves or losing capital in the process. And there's some terrible findings But they also have cash flow and support their communities and families that way. And because it's the year of the Food System Summit, and because I've been thinking a lot about my grandmothers, and I hate to bring it back to myself, but I was thinking of, because last night we had this incredible discussion about what's it going to take to transform food systems. And I was thinking it's women, right? It's about women. It's about decisions women make about food for their families. And whether that's happening in rural Mali as you're planting cotton and borrowing $200 and trying to feed your family through the tiniest investments in pots and pans and things to make food with. And these women who actually give up meals for the love of their families, right? And there is a huge food security issue, which we talk in kind of beautiful, macroeconomic terms very often about what's happening in rural communities because it's easier to tolerate. But I've seen it, hunger season, I've seen it firsthand. The nutritional issues that we're seeing are real, and I don't think we are taking stock and really tackling this enough. So I'm lucky because I work for a revolution on transformation, right? So I can say these things. But what I think is really important is that the world has committed to the Sustainable Development Goals. We've made commitments to change things. And I love what Anino was just saying about the biases. We look at the investment needs. We just did, many of you may have participated, the African Green Revolution Forum annual event. We had a deal room in which 15 African countries presented $7 billion worth of investment needs in the food and ag space. Real good deals, everything from rice to, investments in digital space, investments for women and youth and flagships. And there were, several thousand entrepreneurs participating who had themselves prepared pitches for investments. But we definitely see the bias. We see it going in types of questions, in terms of types of funding that are available, the cost of that funding, the hurdles which are required for women entrepreneurs to access financing that's direly needed. I think I'm inventing words. So I think the digital gap is also something I just wanted to underscore, right? We're talking about in a COVID environment, women entrepreneurship and using digital technologies. And I think, as was underscored here, for trade, which is fundamental to food and agriculture, which I'm obviously, particularly focused on. But the digital gap is huge, right? So there's a profitability gap, which we've seen estimates about 34% between men and women entrepreneurs across the board. There's a digital access gap. Some say it's about 26%. I think that's understated. I think it's bigger than that. Then again, this is just on the women entrepreneurs. We've recently surveyed companies about their concerns, 182 companies, and published this report a couple weeks ago on an agribusiness outlook. And it's basically saying cost of financing is too expensive, the availability is too slow, the release time, right, even when you do get approved, is too slow. And I think you've all seen this. And so there is a asymmetry between the intent and the commitments and what's happening on the ground. And digital is the best way to level the playing field, hands down. So how can we do more of it?
Yeah. And even just one thing I'd like to underscore from a food perspective is, in a country like Nigeria, I know 50% of people's take-home income is spent on food. And so there's so many downstream effects of, if that problem doesn't get solved, like, what are we talking about from a fintech perspective and an e-commerce perspective? I mean, there's some sort of lower down on the hierarchy problems to solve than that. And
I don't mean that I'm not optimistic, because I think change is happening, as everyone said, at an incredibly rapid pace, right? So there's no doubt that the change is occurring. It's just keep pushing it down to the most rural economies. That, how do we push it downstream faster?
Yeah. And to now maybe jump all the way to the top, even though we're talking from the ground floor, Cathy, I'd like to ask you, I mean, obviously corporates and multinationals have an outsized impact on what's happening on the continent. And as it relates to digitization, as it relates to inclusion, as it relates to, you know, sort of taking insights from the ground and having them fed back up to the decisions that you're making sort of at the upper levels of the continent. Can you speak to some of the work that SAP is doing and that you in particular want to speak to as it relates to many of these things about, you know, making sure that these problems that we're talking about, or these issues that ought to be addressed, get addressed at the highest levels?
Perfect. And I think, Justin, I'd like to talk about it in 3 buckets. The first, we know that education is undoubtedly the foundation of what we need to be doing. So for us, I mean, one of the biggest drives is to ensure we are contributing as much as we can to digital skills. So that's why we run 2 flagship programs, what we call Africa Code Week, just to create a high level of awareness of the importance of being able to think in a logical manner, to understand how to relate to technology. I mean, on average, we touched about 2 million young kids on an annual basis for the last few years, about 6 years that we've been doing this, or doing certification programs, etc. We've got some amazing digital programs that we run there. On an inclusion point of view, there's the 2 other buckets that I'd like to talk about. The one is, well, we have, and I particularly have a real passion for social enterprises, because I see many governments having initiatives to do investments into SMMEs, trying to find a way to address the unemployment issue in many economies, and it often hasn't worked. And what we see more and more is that social enterprises have the amazing ability to not just do good for societies in which they operate, but also to contribute towards economic growth and stimulation. And one of our key strategies around social enterprises is to include them into our procurement ecosystem. So we've started to, country by country, look at allocating a percentage of our procurement spend and saying, you know, if typically we buy stationery from the big, you know, stationery suppliers, perhaps we should look at a social enterprise who's doing something good and rather allocate that spend to them, as one example. And we really are passionate about this, doing it in our own organization and encouraging many other companies to do the same. Can you imagine what would happen if all the multinationals, all the big successful organizations took a small fraction of their procurement spend and allocated it in a meaningful way to social enterprises? I mean, mind-boggling. And then the last bucket is really about the environment. So we start particularly around impact on the environment, and we're doing such a cool project in Ghana, where we're using our technology to address the issue of waste that's happening, or litter, I should say, that's happening in Ghana. And we are using our technology to connect the most disempowered, economically disenfranchised part of the process, which is the pickers, right? They're at the bottom of the food chain. They're doing the best job in the whole world, which is to pick up the litter and to find a way to sustainably get rid of it, and connecting them with the people or the organizations that need them the most. Let's just say, you know, the big soft drink organization that we all know from the US, and finding a way to get that connection going, because then the pickers have the transparency to know what to ask for their load of waste, get revenue, have a bit of humanity in that process, some dignity, and then the food chain continues right until the end user, which is, of course, the consumer. I mean, that's the kind of interesting things we're doing as an organization. One, to drive inclusivity, but really to help Africa build the capacity and the capability to use technology to leapfrog its contribution into the global economy. So really exciting stuff, I feel, in what we're doing as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stephen, I'd like to ask you the same question and to get similar perspective as the other sort of big corporate multinational representative on this panel. Are there things that you're doing similarly, and also from an inclusivity perspective that DHL is doing to sort of help build the future that we wish to see on the continent?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think the biggest decision for this year during the pandemic was that we launched Go Trade. We've been involved in trade facilitation for some years, but we've decided to put it on a formal footing. We've continued, and we've built our focus particularly around female entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa. We sponsored the Sherry Blair Foundation with the Her Ventures program. We're working at the moment with ITC on She Trades. We're developing a number of programs, and if there's anything that I would like to sort of get across to the audience today, is that as far as we're concerned, there's a lot to do in 2021. We have a number of programs in Africa that we will be working on, both on the customs side and on helping entrepreneurs. We want to get SMEs training cross-border. I think the good news is, in terms of female entrepreneurs, is 75% of businesses that trade exclusively online in Africa are led by women. And I think that's a good indicator. But we have a clear agenda for next year of training SMEs in Africa to export. We want to also drive intra-African trade and reap the benefits of the AFCFTA. It's about sustainable economic growth. So, anyone out there, we will be running these programs. The training is free. We invite people to get for the training, and we are looking to broaden that. So, just as an example, next year we already have done the scoping, and we will be running programs in Kenya, in Ghana, in Cote d'Ivoire, and Rwanda. But that's not all of them. That's just staged, and it will be growing. So anyone at the forum and has an entrepreneur or representing champions for entrepreneurs, get in touch with her. We're working, for example, with UNDP. We're working with the German government. We're working with ITC and a number of other donors, such as the Global Alliance. So for us, we've decided this is the only way to really drive this. We're a transport and logistics company. Trade is part of our DNA. We need to play an active role in driving that. And like many of the panel here, we're committed to the SDGs. A priority for me this year and next year is what we deliver against SDG 5 in our trade facilitation programs. So we've been working very, very much on that. And what we've also been doing in terms of our current advocacy work is talking to governments and telling them, look, you need to start streamlining and modernizing your customs processes to get the vaccine in. But at the same time, what we've been looking at is the benefits of digitalization for women, because digitalization keeps women away from the border. It reduces the human interaction. As it's well known that women suffer disproportionately from corruption, and this is a global issue. This isn't Africa. This is a global issue. And of course, they suffer harassment as well at the border. And then, as we've heard today as well, this is discrimination. E-commerce is a level playing field. And I think it was what Cathy mentioned earlier on. It is a level playing field. And this is what we are driving very much towards, is that we get entrepreneurs in Africa. They may be selling locally at the moment, but you get yourself on the internet and you have instant access almost to the global market. So this is something that we're very much driving towards. We have another part of our program that we're developing at the moment is a mentoring scheme as well. So we're also involved in that. So for us, going forward, deliver the vaccine, but also get that recovery as much as possible. And women must play a much more greater role in that recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the last couple of minutes that we have left, I'd like to just give everybody an opportunity just to have one last word. It is a big panel, so we're trying to distribute as best as possible. But a last word just on, as I hope I'm not being too premature as I say that we're sort of exiting the COVID era, but certainly I'm ready to exit. So we're going to talk from that perspective. And as the calendar turns and it's 2021, obviously there's still just big questions around the resiliency and anti-fragility of businesses on the continent and those who are becoming more digital as a result of this era. There's a question about stickiness of the digital transformation, and there's a question about how we foster inclusivity within all of that. We've kind of talked around all of those themes, but the last word that I'd like everyone to speak to a little bit is just what are you excited about or excited for as we go into 2021? Is there anything in particular that you're hoping to see or excited to see as it relates to the work that you're doing in these topics anything that we haven't talked about in that regard that you might want to leave us on a positive note. So Katya, maybe I'll start with you and then we'll go around the horn again.
Sure, it's a great way to wrap up our conversation. And just to sort of carry on from the digital transformation point of view, I'm excited to see digital transformation continue happening across different industries, across the continent. I'm hoping that it's going to make sense, however, because digital transformation for the sake of digital transformation is not going to change lives. It's not going to bring benefits to people. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to drive digital transformation for our respective organizations and see our partners do the same for the right reasons. And I hope that it will include inclusivity, it will include equality, and it will include a change for the better. Now, what I'm also hoping for in 2021 is that we are going to improve the way we communicate. One of the consequences of COVID was not just the pandemic, but it was also an infodemic. We've seen a huge influx of fake news, and it's not just Africa that suffers from it. We've seen a lot of information that has been harmful, that has caused people to die because of the conspiracy theories, because COVID doesn't exist, because you don't need to wash your hands, because physical distance doesn't work. And this has literally cost human lives. Now, as APO Group, early on back in April, I believe, we've launched an initiative whereby we've been distributing press releases for African governments and organizations on a pro bono basis that were related to COVID, because we knew that we have access to an incredible network of journalists across the continent, and it is our duty as an organization that spreads the news, that spreads corporate news, to do that also, to make sure that journalists have access to verified information and that they can then communicate it to their audiences, which has been an incredible success. I think in the first month, we've distributed over 1,000 press releases. Moving from that, we've worked very closely with World Health Organization, organizing their press briefings, again, for exactly the same reason, to ensure access to verified information, to ensure that we can support the trickle-down effect from where the decisions are being made to basically what does it actually mean for businesses, for entrepreneurs, and for individuals as such. And we've been doing similar work with Africa Union CDC Center. We've also become part of UNESCO Coalition for Education. And I think that we haven't really touched on that, but education has been extremely affected by COVID. We can't go to universities anymore, and not every university has the capability to actually launch a full-blown digital learning expertise in a matter of months. So time has been lost for students. What we're trying to do is we're trying to support education. We're trying to support UNESCO's efforts in supporting education and making sure that especially girls have access to education. Because as we're gathering here today, we understand that the future is in many respects, is on women's shoulders. And we have to do a lot to support girls, to support young girls, to make sure they have access to tools, to education, and that they can prepare themselves to become successful entrepreneurs.
Thank you. Jonathan, you're up. Same question.
Yeah, sure, fine. I mean, I'm a fairly simple guy, and I kind of focus on nuts and bolts. So I suppose, for me, being in tech, being in digital, this has been a wild time. But I like the fact that it's kind of woken up the world a bit to digital, which is great. I like business. Business is any way, shape, or form, really. I don't mind if it's digital or not. And I think it's been horrible to see how this pandemic has hit certain sectors, but not others. But I also believe very much in the resilience of entrepreneurs and the resilience of especially African ones who are always good at making a plan. And it's been great for us to see, even from the data that we see, that people have changed. They pivoted their businesses to start selling essential goods or whatever else. They had the infrastructure there, they had the means, they had the platforms, and they were able to repurpose to do something that was more suitable to the environment that they were in. So it just showed up a lot about resilience, which I really admired and appreciated. So going into 2021. I think that I'm excited at digital, which I've always been a big proponent of, even in the really early days when it was really, really nascent. So I like the fact that that's kind of happened, despite any of the other effects. I think on a more personal level, I quite like the fact that we've had this ability for people to start working from home if it's possible. And you know, a lot of us are information workers these days, so it is possible for a lot, not for others. You know, in agriculture, that's not something you can do from home. But, you know, I like the fact that has become a lot more prevalent, because it saves on travel time, it saves on you know, a lot of carbon emission stuff that is also another problem, right? But even more than that, I think it allows you to design your life better, and it's now just become more accepted. So, you know, if you want to work early in the morning, late in the evening, spend the middle of the day with your kids, you know, you can do that now. It's a lot easier. You have a lot more agency in your day-to-day life. So I kind of like that. It's an effect we've seen close to home in terms of managing, you know, a fair number of staff. And I think other businesses have seen as well. Now you're giving a little bit more responsibility to the people who work in your organizations to manage their own time effectively. And I think we've all been pleasantly surprised that it's actually worked out pretty well. And I think that bodes well for kind of the future of business and the future of work-life balance. And yeah, just less traveling around, which is pretty good from a business perspective. I think business travel is going to be reasonably curtailed, you know, going into the next few years, as people have now come to accept that no, you don't have to have that in-person meeting. It can be done on Zoom. It can be done on some digital platform. So I think that's, you know, personally something that I think is quite great about this revolution.
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, who wants to sit in traffic, right? And it may not be a good time for commercial real estate people, but otherwise it's a good thing. Anina, what about you?
Well, I think, you know, we've been talking about the fourth industrial revolution for forever. And I think that what we have actually seen it really come to life, you know, in the last few months. Digital technology is a new infrastructure, just as roads and, you know, telephone lines and railways were many, many years ago. However, we see that there are also gaps. So that's, you know, we need to work on those gaps so that everybody is included. But I think that, you know, the embracing of digital technology and the ability for Africa actually to leapfrog, we've seen it, you know, from M-Pesa, we're seeing it now, and that, you know, we're not held back by legacy systems. I think it's an opportunity for us.
Yes, absolutely. Stephen, we'll go Stephen, Vanessa, then Cathy, so everyone can prepare, and then we'll wrap up. You're up.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, so I'm excited about the projects that we're launching next year. You know, we're looking very much towards the future. We're looking towards recovery, and we're looking to getting SMEs to global markets. I think one of the key things is, and I heard it earlier on, is about the regulatory framework. You know, what I've heard this morning from the private sector is very much an optimistic view of driving things forward and innovation. We need governments to support that as well. We have the AFCFTA, and if we're going to benefit from that, and we're really going to benefit from e-commerce, you know, governments need to start modernizing their processes, particularly around the borders. You've got to let your SMEs export as easily as possible. So digitalization and regulation is a key changer here. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. Vanessa, what about you?
Okay, thank you so much. I would like to just say three things. One, we've launched a Value for Her platform, and it should be accessible live. It's really for a meeting place and network. We know that women thrive on networks. So training is great, but it's not enough, and there's a lot of data supporting that. I'm the first person to be a big fan of education, but networking and building credibility through expanded networks is really critical. And I think that will drive up the investment viability of a lot of the women entrepreneurs who are hopefully listening into this, and then also participating in so many of these opportunities live. The other thing is voice and advocacy. So how do we bring together, I mean, Stephen's doing great work on Go Trade. Each of you and your networks, APO, fantastic support of communications on COVID. You know, SAP has done a phenomenal backbone of digital intelligence and you know, data for ag and digital. But what can we do to bring the voice of women from the continent much higher in the decision-making circles? We just really need to push that harder. So that's my view, and I'm pushing my boss to be louder. If you haven't seen or met Agnes Kalibata, then you better, because she's coming first. I'm coming your way. Over to you.
Awesome. And Cathy, we'll let you have the last word, please.
Thank you, Justin and team. I think I want to say that what I'm most excited about is that as COVID has rocked the world, what I see emerging is a new leadership style that is really critical for the survival of organizations and governments going into the future. And that leadership style is not just about top and bottom line. It's about making sure that we recognize the challenges and the issues in the societies and the economies in which we all operate. And for me, this is by far the most important time for women to see the opportunity that the world is changing, and that as leaders embrace this new leadership concept, that we create more opportunity absolutely for women to be included, but to make sure that just generally speaking, we are responsible and we take the initiative to drive a more inclusive society and business world in which we operate. So that's from me. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone on the panel and to the attendees for listening. It's a big panel, a lot of different sectors, but I think it just goes to show how much opportunity there is for transformation on the continent from a digital perspective, from an inclusivity perspective. So I just want to thank everyone on the panel for joining us. And then I think Leanne is going to hop on and just introduce the next panel or what's next for the forum. But thank you to everyone again for listening, and have a good rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Justin. Thanks so much to everybody that's been a part of it. Stephen, Cathy, Katya, Jonathan, Vanessa. And you know, your input has been absolutely incredible. And I've loved the different perspectives that were covered. You know, it's amazing to hear how it was always spun back to the plight of women. And I appreciate everybody that was doing it. I mean, Vanessa, you did that so well. You really did. Katya, your vision of media, and that's where I work. I mean, I work in the media space, and it has been such a dangerous time in the media for misinformation, for fake news, for things that have actually just, I mean, it's actually blown my mind that these things can happen, be allowed to happen, and we've got to be very, very vigilant. But all of you, you've been amazing. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much.